Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Isabel Millar, a PhD candidate in Lacanian psychoanalysis, cultural theory, and contemporary philosophy in the School of Arts, Culture, and Communication at Kingston University. Her research is on the later Lacan, artificial intelligence, and the body. But I really try to get psychoanalytic ideas out there to broader audiences through talking about other things. And I love this technology, Sexbots. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
How did you get into this?
Well, my background is philosophy, so I was initially interested in questions relating to subjectivity and the challenges of how new technology was forcing us to think about the subject in different ways. And for me, being interested in new trends in philosophy, as it were, in speculative realism and new materialisms, there was something that I felt missing in these discourses, and it was precisely the psychoanalytic dimension. So for me, Lacan became a focus of my research because it gave me something that nothing else afforded me previously.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, so like I said, I just let you start basically wherever you want, whatever's on your mind, or if there's anything particular you want to start with, and then we'll just make sure that we get to all these different kinds of things that you're working on and projects you have coming up.
Okay. Well, I think for me, the thing that I find most fascinating is the intersection between sex and artificial intelligence that we find in the figure of the sex robot. And it's a way that I use a sexbot as a vanishing mediator between, I suppose, philosophy and psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis is about knowledge of sex and philosophy is about knowledge of the concept. So when you put them together in this figure of the sexbot, you get this very strange, bizarre object, which is it's an object and it's a concept and it's a symptom and it's lots of things, really.
And how did this first come about for you? Like, how did you start getting interested in it?
Because, well, I was writing on, my training in psychoanalysis was largely through clinicians in the contemporary clinic. So I was taught a lot of theory from people who were practicing analysts, but in the Millarian field. So a lot of the concepts that I came to grips with of Lacan were via the later writings and teachings. So I really kind of went backwards. Started off with Millar, reading Lacan, and then of course Lacan reading Freud, which was I think an interesting way to do it, because there were some very interesting new concepts in the Millarian field that haven't really been explored in the context of wider conceptual questions in theory in general. For example, the hypothesis of ordinary psychosis, which is what the clinic works with at the moment. And so it was through reading and learning about the clinical applications of some of these new concepts that I started to see how this was very relevant in terms of trying to think about subjectivity from a sort of more cultural, philosophical point of view. And so the sexbots, it's kind of also something that has obviously come into popular discourse lately, because everyone's asking about, what's the sexbot mean for humanity? And I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and I know there's lots of academics working on it. But as so far, I haven't heard anyone saying anything very interesting about it or sensible about it. Most of the conversations have been on a quite kind of normative, psychologizing level about what the sexbot is, what does it mean for human relations, and what does the sex of the sexbot mean. And the problem is people are asking what that means to have sex with a robot when they haven't asked what it means to have sex with a human, and which is what psychoanalysis is about. And we still don't know what it is. That's the point.
Yeah, I love this title of one of your papers. The sexual relation does not exist, but does my sexbot know?
Yeah, exactly. Because this is the thing to me that sums up what is happening when you're entering into a relationship with a supposed AI. Like in the film Ex Machina that I talk about in this paper, is this this question of knowledge, which is sort of it's staged, the kind of the castration of the subject is staged in their interaction with the cybernetic female in this film, which is a very familiar trope that we see in film of the male human trying to get to grips with the female robot, but particularly in the film Ex Machina, because they have to go through the Turing test and he is lured into wondering what her desire is through their interactions, and she's sort of making him work for her. She kind of fulfills the place of the hysteric subject by constantly asking him for knowledge, which he then has to give her in order for her to find out who she is. So she kind of exemplifies this cliched idea of the hysteric woman. But in terms of knowledge, it shows us in a very kind of simplistic but beautiful way the kind of epistemic drive that is at the root of this non-existent sexual relationship between the figure of the man and the figure of the woman played out in that film.
I haven't seen that film, but now I'm going to have to watch it.
Now you have to watch it, yeah.
And I also like how you called this like place the Abyss, and then this company that makes these robots, it's called Abyss Creations.
I know, it's so weird because you know I've seen so many videos now of the people who make these dolls, and it's quite chilling really. And but what's fascinating is when you see some of the men talking about how they're relating to these objects, they are completely able to fulfill themselves sexually, if not more, with this object. And it would be very easy to say, oh well, because they're just projecting their fantasies onto this creature, and so it's a perversion. Well, actually, there's something more going on, because the fact that you can more easily achieve a sexual satisfaction with something that you believe doesn't exist behind the imaginary level of it tells us a lot about the normative ways that we have sex in the first place.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. But I think also it's really important to not just put it all under the same kind of, look at it at the same level, that, you know, if the way that a woman would have sex with a robot is the same as the way that a man would have sex with a robot, because absolutely not. They're being used for completely different purposes as well.
Can you say more about that?
Well, in the same way that we all have sex for to achieve a different form of enjoyment, so we achieve a different form of enjoyment with a robot. The kind of, in Lacanian circles, this expression, the non-existent sexual relationship, which is almost a cliche for people who read Lacan, is something that actually is not self-evident to people outside psychoanalytic circles. But once I think you think a little bit about what he means, and I won't go into the graphs of sexuation here, but the idea that the logical positioning of enjoyment, whether you have a masculine form of enjoyment or a feminine form of enjoyment, which of course is nothing to do with your body or whether you are a man or a female biologically or genetically speaking, because psychoanalysis isn't interested in that specifically. It tells us a way of, shows us a way of understanding forms of enjoyment and how they don't correspond with each other. So what a man wants when he's having sex with a woman is nothing like what a woman wants when she's having sex with that same man. And this incompatible relationship, again, can be misinterpreted as a sort of banal statement about how men and women are, incompatible and always their relationships break down. But it's something more ontological than that, which is to do with a form of knowledge about sex that we never really have.
And for people that don't know anything about the field, you mentioned like these two different professors or philosophers, and they're kind of two different views about this issue, and then yours is kind of a different one from that. But could you maybe go into that a little bit for people?
Sorry, but which two different professors?
Like the perspective of the bot being something that's going to be problematic and that shouldn't exist, versus
the idea that it's a therapeutic thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is the problem, because at the moment the debate seems to fall between, on the one hand, yay, great, this is emancipatory, and now we all can enjoy ourselves in whatever way we like, and it's total freedom, and furthermore, people also arguing that it could be used therapeutically, for people who don't have a partner and who just want to feel that they have, some form of intimacy with something. And even further, people say, well, it's actually can be used to treat pathologies. People are talking about it being used for paedophiles, for example, and which is an extremely problematic conversation. Of course, maybe we won't go into it here, but so that's this kind of positive side of it. And then on the negative side, you have, of course, people saying, well, this is just going to make men and women even more at odds with each other. It's going to increase misogyny. Women are going to be made into objects, and this will ultimately result in complete disintegration of civilization. And we must stop it at all costs. I think neither of those positions are accurate. I think both can be true, but that's not really the point. I think that what the thing about a sexbot shows us at the moment, at the level that we've got them now, is they're just showing us what the reality is, which is that it's very possible for humans, especially humans who have a sort of masculine sexuality. I'm saying this carefully because, as we know, people say, no, because I'm a woman and I want to have sex with a robot. Fine, you can, that's great. Having sex with a robot enables them to enjoy in exactly the way that they want to enjoy, which is not a surprise. Most people are not going to be surprised by this idea, as much as it may be disgusting to some people. So I think that what's more interesting is to figure out what it tells us about the ways that sexuality inherently fails, which is what the discovery of psychoanalysis is that sexuality fails. All that we can do is try and achieve some knowledge about what that form of failure is, which is what the point of the clinic of psychoanalysis is to find out what that unconscious knowledge is that you have, and then eventually, when you get to the point of supposedly discovering it, you realize there was nothing there in the first place, because it's a knowledge that you can't possibly know. And that's the point about the sexbot is it's almost just like a kind of caricature, an embodiment of that ridiculous idea that if you have a fantasy about a woman, the kind of the semblant that is a sexbot, which is literally covering up for the fact that there is nothing behind it, a ridiculous exaggeration of a massive breasts and a perfect body that looks like no real woman in the world, is the dream, is the idea that you actually want to achieve that you can never actually get in reality.
And so you said that your paper is going to be in a book that's coming up soon.
Well, all these papers are sort of drawn from my sort of PhD thesis, which will be hopefully by the end of the year finished. So yeah, there's a lot of work to go for that, but yeah.
And what do you tend to do in London? Like, is there a psychoanalytic scene that you're involved in, or a philosophical scene, or?
Yeah, so I'm part of Kingston University, and I'm also involved with Birkbeck a lot. And both institutions have kind of a lot of links to Lacanian circles. So I am involved a lot in meetings with the Lacanian circles, and also the Laboratory for Lacanian Politics, which is part of the New Lacanian School. So yeah, there's lots of things going on around. Yeah.
And what's that like, the laboratory?
It's a new group that's kind of started up with the intention of using psychoanalysis in the Lacanian orientation to think and talk about political, social issues in a way that's outside the clinic. So it doesn't just draw on psychoanalysts, but because I'm not a clinician, it also kind of involves people from philosophy and politics and anyone who wants to join, really, who has an interest, to be able to kind of use the tools of psychoanalysis to try and mediate the horrific conditions of civilization at the moment, which is a difficult job, but yeah.
No, but I really feel that psychoanalytic thought can really help at this moment. And that's why I do so much work to like have this podcast and host events and try to publish books with various kinds of writing. Like I have a book that just came out recently that's specifically like Lacanian views on psychoanalysis and violence. But I also have another book that's called Rendering Unconscious, which is kind of what the podcast spawned from, that's about to come out, where I collect like really different views, where it's like Lacanian psychoanalysis, but also just like any kind of psychology. There's behavioral therapy, there's poetry, just anybody kind of looking at the mind in any sort of way and attaching it to current events in their own manner. Just to kind of get more of an eclectic view, because my experience was that, you know, I find all of this so helpful and interesting, but I felt like our circles were so small. And I really want to get the ideas out to a broader and broader audience. And even like within psychoanalysis, you know, like you said, the Millarians are very cut off from other Lacanians. You know, the Jungians are very cut off from the Freudians, the Kleinians, and everybody's kind of in their own camps, you know? And I really think that that's too bad, and that there should be more kind of cross-disciplinary discourse as much as we can, instead of getting too hung up on the little points that we disagree on, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really important because obviously it's important to be rigorous with the theory and to not sort of bastardize it. But at the same time, often what happens in Lacanian circles is that, you know, it becomes so exclusive, this little club where everybody speaks the same language, and you're really trying to do something important theoretically or politically, but yet you can't actually break out of that bubble because nobody else will understand you if you go out into the world and try and talk about with all of this terminology. So it's a question of trying to get to without watering it down, to get other people interested in questions that are really important for us, especially now. You know, that's why for example, the Sexbot to me was a really good example of when psychoanalysis is essential, because you can't talk about these kind of questions without psychoanalysis. Otherwise you're chasing your tail. You know, the idea that you'd still be talking about sex as some taboo that we don't know anything about. It's like, well, actually psychoanalysis has been knowing quite a lot about it, more than any other discourse, for over 100 years, and yet people still kind of misunderstand psychoanalysis as some mystical mumbo jumbo, which is anything but. So I think it's really important, yeah, to try and disseminate ideas in a way that's engaging to people.
Yeah, and I found that people really get it, you know. Like I often do things about the arts or the occult or something that's more like popular than Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
And I find that, you know, when you present the ideas to people with something that's interesting to them otherwise, they really get it, you know, and they really engage with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. And I think it's really good for psychoanalysis also to get in conversation with other disciplines, with film, with art, with performance, and obviously philosophy, and get some fresh air as well, and technology.
Yeah, there's one guest that I had on. I guess it was just like 6 weeks ago, but I've been really like into the podcast this year, so I've done quite a few so far. His name is Damian Patrick Williams, and he writes about machine consciousness and intersections with like religious thought and this sort of thing. And he was really interesting to talk to, so I'm going to make sure that he listens to your episode.
Oh, brilliant! Oh,
and
yeah,
vice versa.
Yeah, I think no, I know who you're talking about because I looked him up, and he sounds very interesting. Yeah, I think that the technology aspect is crucial, definitely crucial to my research, and it's this at the same time how psychoanalysis is a challenge to the question of the sexbot and philosophy. Also, technology is a challenge to psychoanalysis, and it's forcing psychoanalysis to evaluate the stakes of some of its basic concepts. And the drives, for example, are things that are having to morph into something else. Now we're trying to think about what would happen with advances in biotechnology, with how AI may become part of the biological body, for example. That's something that we haven't had to deal with yet, but it may be that quite in the near future, like Black Mirror, we're going to start having chips implanted in us. The body will start to circulate around different forms of knowledge, different forms of enjoyment, and different drives, which forces psychoanalysis not to just kind of fall into this general idea about technology is this product of capitalism and it's all forcing us to enjoy everything and be subjects of pure enjoyment, which that's interesting, and the kind of the Zizekian angle, but there's something else that's going to happen when we really have to start talking about the cyborg that's been this kind of fantasy thing, and it's not a fantasy anymore actually, as Black Mirror shows us very well.
Mm-hmm. And just how it's so embedded in our lives at this point. Like, I mean, I don't even remember what it was like before it was like this,
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I don't think psychoanalysis quite has a discourse around that quite yet. It's still like this kind of other thing that's invading, but it's not that anymore. It's like completely part of everything we do at this point.
Yeah. And to think how fast it's moving, that, probably in a couple of years' time, we're going to look back to this conversation now and think, that was very naive because we didn't see this was coming. So quickly you can be out of date now when you're trying to talk about the stakes of humanity, and especially the whole kind of cyber culture stuff. If you just read stuff from 10 years ago in cultural theory of people trying to hypothesize the cybernetic human, and they always get it wrong. They have these sort of very hyperbolic ideas about, what are the new challenges? And it's never the thing that you think it's going to be. We're not cyborgs in the way that we thought we were going to be. We're cyborgs in different ways, and it's very important, I think, to be very shrewd with these concepts and not just throw around this idea of the post-human is here and we're all not humans anymore. Well, what were we before? What are we now? We just psychoanalysis is very good at kind of breaking through all of this and saying, actually, hold on a minute, there's something that we never really knew what we were in the first place, so let's figure out that before we start trying to imagine this new futuristic human.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it goes a lot along with like the whole everything with gender that's been going on as well, and like all these different arguments that are just really banal of like, what's biological and what's this or that, and it's like, but humans have never been just like some biological entity. Like the whole thing that makes humans is the fact that we build things and use tools and work in a different way and create our vision in the world. We don't just live in nature. Period. We never have.
Exactly. And Freud already talks about this prosthetic god civilization and its discontents, and that, you know, we always creating these auxiliary organs, but it never really makes us happy, because we just circulate. They just circulate around the drives constantly, and we never fulfill this dream of omnipotence that we think we're going to get. And that's exactly, he was already talking about this inherent problem with technology, is that we don't really know what technology is. You know, it's a way of extending our drives, but how, why, what are we doing with technology? Where is it taking us? You know, and where do you draw the line between technology and the human, which is obviously a massive field within philosophy itself.
So how did you become interested in philosophy in the first place?
Oh, well, my undergraduate was philosophy, so I actually my A-levels were in philosophy, and yeah, so I was interested in philosophy from many years ago, and then afterwards I took a break and did some other things, and then some years ago came across Slavoj Žižek, which I'm sure happens to a lot of people, and became interested in psychoanalysis, and thought, oh, actually, all the philosophy that I did seems much more interesting now, because it's relevant to something that I can actually get hold of, and hence I went back into doing a master's, and then started my PhD, and it was through really the connection between psychoanalysis and philosophy that that I found was most engaging.
Yeah, because I find this whole field, like you said, there's a whole part of philosophy that's dedicated to this idea of like what's technology and what's the human. This is something that I never really think about in my work, because I've very much been just like a clinician, you know, and I didn't have a philosophy degree in graduate school. I had a PsyD, which is like a doctor in psychology, which is working in hospitals and this sort of thing, and then I went to analytic training after that. So I find that fascinating that there's an entire field that's dedicated to looking at these sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was quite interested. Part of my spur to take the technology question further, I was reading Bernard Stiegler, who is a French philosopher of technology, and sort of he's a Freudian but not a Lacanian, and he writes about sort of the originary technicity of the human, and he talks about the sort of very essence of humanity as being the technical being, you know, as a and from that idea I suddenly realized, I was reading him and thinking, he's very sort of Lacanian in a funny way, but then I thought, well, actually Lacan could also benefit a lot from engaging with some philosophers on the question of technology as well. So hence where I kind of put the two and two together. I think it's a lot to be said actually about both things. Yeah,
and I feel that this is a really important intersection. So I'm so glad to have found you. I'm going to keep following this work.
Oh, thank you.
Who do you like to read?
Well, I'm afraid I'm very deep in Lacan at the moment, and I'm just chewing through all the seminars, because everything's coming out now in English that wasn't there before. So yeah, just reading the main seminars, to be honest. And I'm trying to, because I always have I want to read everything, but the problem is, well, certainly in the first year of my PhD, I read too much, and then I got really confused because I didn't know where to stop, and then I ended up not knowing what my PhD was about anymore. I realized if you want to know something really well, you have to just, for a moment, stick with one person and get hold of that before then you can start playing around with other things. So I'm quite religiously Lacanian at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a task to get through the seminars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Are there any sorts of like study groups or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I often go to I've been going over to Ghent in Belgium for a few events. So we did one on a reading group on Seminar 20 last year, and then this year we're going to do Seminar 23. So that will be really, really fun. And yes, they're always led by very, very brilliant scholars who take us through the text slowly. It's quite funny to have your little nerdy group of people who are reading these seminars, because it's like, oh, you're a person who I can talk about with this. Like, I can't talk to anyone else but you. So it's quite a nerdy group, yeah, but it's
Yeah,
fun.
but the guys over at Ghent are great. That's like Sten Van Heulen and Oliver
Yeah,
Hagen.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
they're fantastic.
Yeah, no,
And
they're
their
great.
books are fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
No,
recommend them a lot.
they're brilliant, and they kind of have done a lot of work to making Lacan accessible and relevant, which is so important because I think thanks to them we've seen a resurgence of interest, and also not just in the humanities but of course in the clinic of psychoanalysis, to make it something that has something to say in an environment where it's very anti-psychoanalytic, where everybody wants CBT or neuroscience, and nobody trusts anymore the subject of speech. And what they've done is to try and really hold out for, like, well, this is important. We've got to make sure that it doesn't get lost. So yeah, they do some important stuff.
Mm-hmm. And there's a quite good scene in London too. I was in New York for 10 years, and we had a lot of different schools of psychoanalysis there, just different institutes. But that was the thing, they were all very divided, like I said earlier. So we kind of got a group together that we called Das Unbehagen, where we kind of had different people from all the institutes who were also interested in talking to others. And we kind of cross-pollinated everything, and that worked out really well. But in London, they have like Darian Leaders there, and he's got like a psychoanalytic program, and Bunnell University has a psychoanalytic program. So it has more than most places, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's gaining traction again. I mean, at Kingston, we had for a couple of years, we were very lucky to have a master's program in psychoanalysis, which had teachers who were practicing clinicians coming in to teach theory, which was a luxury. We had Veronique Verus who came and taught us theory, and that was fantastic because you're getting it from somebody who knows it so well, and rather than and of course it's brilliant to have the clinic, the Lacanian theory in the context of the humanities at large, which, for example, we've got taught by Scott Wilson as well, who is a very interesting thinker and writer. So to have both, the clinical and the cultural entrance into Lacanian thought is really, really good, actually.
Yeah, and I'm very interested to hear like what it's like in these different cities around the world, because I love the idea of having more international dialogue. Even like we started in New York, like within the different institutes, but now like I've talked to someone in Toronto and Wyoming and California, and even someone in Utah, and now I've just moved to Stockholm a couple of months ago, so now I'm kind of starting to meet people over here in Europe more. And I love the idea of having sort of like loose international kind of network that's not like through like the international psychoanalytic, because I'm very Lacanian in that way. I don't want to be involved with the IPA. I went to an institute that was IPA and the American Psychoanalytic, and I saw all the problems that Lacan was talking about. It really felt like it was very deadening. They were very controlling, and it's not good for psychoanalytic formation. But I love the idea of being able to talk to different people with different theoretical orientations and in different steps of their development, and have more communication that way. Yeah.
No, I think that's really important. I mean, I'm hoping that there's going to be more traction with Lacanian psychoanalysis in certainly in London, because I think that people are realizing that we need it, and we can't deal with the problems that we're having in civilization without using it and thinking harder and taking more time to think. I think the certainly reason that I love Lacan, and I'm sure lots of people will agree, is that he's not easy, and he forces you to think and to work, and he shows you that if there it's not an easy answer, because if there is an easy answer, then you're probably not asking the right question, and you have to keep going. And the problem with today is that most people want an easy answer. Most people want a solution. Why do I feel like this? why is my life horrible? Why is the world horrible? And people give you, you get a solution from, you either get it from a mental health response, or you get it from the media, or you get it from politics, or you get it from anything that just gives you something to go, here you go, this is the reason why you're sad or angry, or and Lacan teaches us there isn't going to be an easy answer, but that's good, and you need to keep going. And I think more people need to get used to the fact that there's not an easy answer. No meme on Instagram is going to tell you that you're wonderful and everything's going to be fine. It's shit and you're going to suffer. But that's great, because that's how you are going to learn more about everything. So
that's life.
Yeah, it's life. Exactly. Yeah.
We're all here in it. No,
Yeah.
it's very true. And that's the thing I like psychoanalysis about, working like in the clinic, is like, you're not going to, like, my patients look at me and like, I'm not going to give you the answer. I don't have the answer. You have to figure it out. I'll ask you questions, or like point things out here and there to kind of help you figure it out. But like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I think too, like you said, like, people want these easy answers, but they actually, they don't really, they think they want that, but people are much happier when they're working. People like working and they like challenges and that sort of thing. And I think everybody would feel a lot better off if they were more challenged and weren't just taking these quick fixes, because they don't work.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, and I've gotten very used to like allowing people to just feel uncomfortable. Like, we can just sit here.
Yeah.
That's fine too.
Yeah. 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 And to be able to come to terms with the fact that nobody else has a knowledge that will give you anything that you think that you need, and ultimately you're going to have to be responsible for it yourself, which psychoanalysis is not a moralizing discourse. It doesn't tell you what's right or wrong. It tells you that you have to figure out what you think is right or wrong, and that's ultimately your responsibility, which is very terrifying and is probably a horrible experience to go through, but a necessary one.
Have you been in psychoanalysis?
Good question. No, because I don't want to. No, I have tried and started the process, but because I'm doing psychoanalysis theoretically and in the middle of my PhD, I tried it and I thought, actually I need to choose one or the other at this moment, because it's too much to go through your analysis and to be trying to do all this theoretical work, because the two get confused, and then you end up asking your analyst about seminar 23, and it's like, this is not the time, we're not here to do that. So I think as well is about the right time to do it as well. If you ever want, I might decide, I never want to be an analyst, or I never want to be an analysis. Is not for everyone either. I wouldn't say that everyone should be an analysis, because there's a whole other political dimension to psychoanalysis, of course, which is that it can't be, not everyone has the access to it or has the means to be able to do it. So there's lots of other questions there as well.
Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't touched upon? Anything coming up?
Well, what events or
anything?
I don't know really. I mean, I keep coming back to this this sexbot thing, because I think it's so fascinating. Like, I was obviously looking up videos about sexbots on YouTube and stuff, and seeing I made the mistake of reading the comments underneath, which actually I need to do, because it's very interesting to find out what people are saying about it. And it's so horrible and horrific, because you just see all of these men saying, yeah, am I allowed to swear?
Mm-hmm.
Just like, oh, yeah, fuck you, bitches, we don't need you anymore. Now you're just obsolete, and we can just, we just fuck these dolls because that's what we really want. And, and you think, okay, this is not one or two people. This is like thousands and thousands of men, like, voicing this absolute, like, horror about real women. And the thing is, it's like, it's such a weird, the logic behind it is so weird, because the men want the women to know that they want to replace them with something that is exactly looks like them, but is not them. But then we don't want you anymore. So what is it that you want what is it that you wanted about a woman? Why just not have a woman then? Why do you want, like, that sounds like a banal thing, but the logic is interesting because it's kind of talking about saying that you want something that you never really had, which is basically, very psychoanalytic in itself. The sort of primordial loss of something that was never really there. So you think, what's happening here? Why are there so many unhappy men? Why do they hate women so much? Which is not really what my PhD is about. It's more like a side note, but it is terrifying, really, because it's not one or two men. I mean, this is huge. This is something that, men really, really, really fucking hate women. A lot of men really fucking, in a way that women just don't hate men. That, like, the myth that all feminists all hate men, and there's a complete fucking myth, because of course everybody knows that's not true. But the disgust that men have for women is something truly, like, incredible, and this is a thing that we need to talk about.
I think it has to do with their mother.
Well, yeah, but why do they hate their mother so much? Do they hate their mothers more now than they used to? I don't know. I don't think so. I just think they're getting more opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's just a very, very, very infantile way of being, when they were completely helpless and their mother had all of the power, and they just can't seem to deal with it, and they just lash out at every turn. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but I think that's what's really at the core.
Yeah, I wonder if they, I mean, yeah, again, it's a stupid question, but I wonder if it's worse than it used to be, if men hate women more than they used to hate women. I don't know, but you'd certainly would think so if you went look at any sort of social media that has a reference to women and sex. I mean, the comments just tell you everything about this hatred, this absolute disgust, and you just think, how is it possible that we just still churn out this kind of, but again, it's not really my concern, I suppose. But it's always there with psychoanalysis that you have to ask these questions. But I don't want to get bogged down by having to make a sort of feminist intervention in something that is actually a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, but it's a real issue.
Yeah,
it's a real issue, and I think it's very it's always going to be very difficult to ever get to the root of that, because I don't think women can deal with the idea of, like, this hatred towards the mother. I don't think men can deal with the idea of this hatred towards the mother. I think people have a really hard time, like, understanding that you could, like, really love and really hate someone in this very basic way.
Yeah.
And I think it's too much for people to wrap their heads around most of the time.
Yeah.
And it's, like, so fundamental. And I don't know if we're ever going to get there.
Yeah. But then do you just say, okay, well, in that case, let's just create loads of artificial intelligences that can perform the desire of people in a completely personalized way, where you can just completely fulfill all of your rage and whatever banal thing that you want to have with your sexual partner. Once you get to that point where you're individualizing everyone's kind of sexuality, what happens after that? I mean, that's a question that I find interesting, that what would happen to sex completely if we just allow everyone to have their own solution, that you just have a ready-made answer to it. You don't have to do it for yourself because it's just there. You say, what is it that you fancy? Oh, here it is. This is what you get, whether it's a male robot or a female robot. What would happen after that? I just think it just blows my mind. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point too that you brought up close to the beginning, with the idea that it really shows what people are kind of doing anyway. Like, people are enacting their own thing on everybody else anyway, or on their partner anyway, but there's another person there. And so like there might be this mismatch that you can't meet, but there's also like repercussions and things happen. So what happens if you can just enact it on something and never have anything come back?
Yeah.
I don't know that would be good. I don't know though. I don't know. I don't even know what that would be like.
Well, I mean, this is again why Lacan's so useful, because he basically teaches us that, you know, the anxiety of the other person's desire is the thing that's most unbearable, is that we can't bear the fact that we don't know what the other person wants. And the idea of a sex bot is brilliant, because you don't have to have that anxiety. It just takes it all away and allows you to be completely autonomous in that situation. But again, you know, from a more kind of philosophical and sort of strictly theoretical perspective, it's also very interesting to think about the idea of artificial intelligence in relation to knowledge, and how the whole fantasy around AI is sort of a very psychologizing idea of what human consciousness is. Of course, in psychoanalysis, you don't talk about consciousness as such, but the idea that you know, that an AI can reach this point in the singularity where it surpasses the human and then becomes omnipotent, and the human is thereby obsolete, which is a fantasy that's kind of based on this idea of the hysteric and the, you know, this hysteric subject versus the master, you know, questioning always the master, you know, tell me what I am, and then no, that's not it, no, that's not it, and then the fantasy that AI will eventually turn around and go, you don't know anymore because I know better than you, you know, and therefore the master is kind of like relieved of the pressure, like, oh, thank God for that, I can go home and, like, you know, watch the telly. But is it kind of this idea of like AI being this quest to enable us to suddenly, you know, we've reached this point where in the future where AI is going to be able to take over. It's such a fantasy, you know, because we don't, whilst it may happen, the presumptions are all based on a very psychologistic idea of what humans are. It doesn't have any idea about what the unconscious is or what desires are. The idea that we know what we want, we don't. So how would an AI know what they want? You know, we don't even know what we want. So how do they know?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
The things you think about.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just think that this is a really interesting thing with the idea that the AI is like, you know, in Black Mirror, for example, you have the AI that's implanted in you and can monitor your desires and preempt your desires and act upon them in a way that supposedly is what you want. But of course, that asks this whole question of what is it that the AI thinks that you want, and what is it that you secretly want, or, you know, the idea of acting in your own interest or against your interests, which, you know, we never act within in our interests. That's the whole point. Otherwise, you know, God knows what we'd do if we actually ever did act in our own interests. That would be interesting.
Yeah, and this is really already happening, I guess, with all the algorithms and everything that the internet's turned into.
Yeah.
This is a very, very relevant field. What do you think about this idea of Damien's that he brought up, where he doesn't call it AI like artificial intelligence, he calls it machine consciousness, because he said if it's like intelligent, then it has its own kind of, like, it's not artificial anymore once it's intelligent. What do you think of this kind of argument?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because exactly the problem with people when they talk about artificial intelligence is that what's real intelligence? You're begging a question about intelligence, human intelligence, that you don't really know the answer to anyway, because it's modeled on a metaphor of a computational metaphor for human consciousness, which is not how human consciousness works. Parts of it, yes, but not all of it. And we don't know how human intelligence works. So I think it's much more accurate to talk about the machine as, I mean, what's the term he used?
Machine consciousness or intelligence.
Exactly, which is that it's not something that we can't model it on something that we already know, because we don't know what it is. So it's a different type of thinking, which is probably a better way to begin. Yeah, I think so.
Well, all this is super interesting, and I think really, really important with the times that we're in.
Yeah, no,
so
it is.
Bravo. I said, so bravo.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to mention that we didn't get to?
No, I don't think so. I think, I mean, the concept of ecstasy is a very sort of fundamental one for me with regards to this question, which is a kind of like the emblematic concept that Jacqueline Millar takes from Lacan, the idea of the ecstasy being the thing that is most intimate to you is actually exterior. It's actually the thing outside of you that you can never actually have, which is basically the structure of the whole of the Lacanian oeuvre. And this, he has a whole seminar on it, Jacqueline Millar. But what is very useful to take away from it is to think about technology as an extimate thing, as opposed to something that's completely separate from us. Is something that comes from a place that we don't really understand, but is very, very intimate at the same time. And in the same way that sex is that extimate thing, so is technology. And therefore it's very important to approach this in this new era, when we're getting sex and technology getting all mixed together, to use this idea of ecstasy, which forces us to remember that these exterior things are actually the most interior at the same time.
No, that was a term that I wasn't familiar with. That's super interesting. So that's your dissertation, is ecstasy sexbots between fantasy and ontology.
Yes, yeah.
Do you want to say any more about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, ecstasy is a concept that first comes up that only is mentioned by Lacan in Seminar 7. Extimité is obviously the French. And it's in relation to his formalizations of the real at that point in his teachings, and the idea that ecstasy is it's a cover for the real, which is a way of covering up for the whole in symbolization, which is a very traumatic thing. So there are different ways of covering up for it, which then Jacqueline Millar will talk about more extensively in his seminar later on in the 80s. But he uses this idea that ecstasy is you see the structure of ecstasy through, for example, the religious cover, which is a way of placing the intimate outside oneself, and this also happens with all different kinds of formulations of human kind of relationships, and the way that we put our most intimate things outside, which the sexual relation is this way of trying to sew together something that isn't really there, and make up for this lack and this hole that we are forever trying to plug up. So yeah, it's an important concept, but also quite a straightforward one, because it basically just shows you that psychoanalysis is not about a depth to be uncovered, but more a external structure that can be examined out in the open. If you start to realize that we're not just creatures who have all these secrets, but we're creatures who create these secrets in order to form a social bond with each other. hence why we have all of these rules of conduct and how to administer our different modes of jouissance, our different modes of enjoyment.
Well put.
Thank you.
Well, it's been really fun talking to you.
Too.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a conversation with Isabel Millar. For more, please visit her website, hystericsdiscourse.wordpress.com, or my website, drvanessasinclair.net. Into ether. Utters emitted. And my eyes vibrate at a catgut rate. Fuck, scratched. The lines well of circumstance, of imperfection. Exhibit at the Morgan, as well as in dialogues. God. Consciousness behind each kiss or your poison bite, infantile, immaculate.